It's 2 in the afternoon. You're doing the weekly shop, and there it is, a pot of basil sitting on the shelf, green and lush and smelling absolutely incredible. You grab it, you bring it home, you put it on the kitchen windowsill where it gets plenty of light. You water it when the soil starts to feel dry. You do everything right. And then, within a week, maybe less, the thing starts to go. Leaves yellowing, stems flopping over, the whole plant slowly melting into a soggy, sad little mess. And you stand there thinking, what did I do wrong? Maybe I overwatered it. Maybe it needed more sun. Maybe I'm just one of those people who can't keep plants alive. But here's the thing. It wasn't you. It was never you. You were set up to fail before you even got to the checkout. Most people assume the problem is care. Too much water, not enough water, wrong windowsill, wrong kitchen. And look, that explanation makes sense, because basil does have a reputation for being a bit fussy. It's a sun-loving Mediterranean herb. It doesn't like cold drafts or sitting in soggy soil. So when it dies, the obvious conclusion is that you got something wrong. But here's the problem with that. You gave it sun, you gave it water, you did your best, and it still died. So if the care isn't the issue, what is? Pull the plant out of its pot and have a proper look at what's going on in there. Go on, because what you'll find is the whole story. Count the stems. On a standard supermarket basil, the kind you find on the shelf in almost every major supermarket, there are usually somewhere between 8 and 14 individual stems. And here's the thing, each one of those stems is its own separate plant. Its own seedling, with its own root system, its own water needs, its own appetite for nutrients, all crammed into a pot about the size of a coffee cup. Now, that sounds like good value, doesn't it? More bang for your buck, more basil for your money. But what's actually happening in that little pot is carnage. Every single one of those plants is fighting its neighbors for the same tiny amount of soil, the same water, the same nutrients. And in a space that small, nobody wins. They exhaust everything within days. The roots tangled together into one big knotted mess with nowhere left to go. And then they all slowly strangle each other. Not pretty. And when you actually pull the root ball apart and have a look, it's just one enormous tangle. You can't tell where one plant ends and the next begins. It's survival of the fittest in there. And the brutal truth is that none of them are fit enough to survive it. They're all going down together. So why do the growers do it? Because it looks incredible in the shop. A pot crammed with 12 plants looks full, lush, and healthy at the point of sale, which is the only moment that actually matters to the people selling it. They're not thinking about what happens on your windowsill a week later. They're thinking about what makes you reach for it on the shelf. And a pot that looks like a tiny jungle, you're going to reach for that every single time. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Take the plant out of its pot. Tease those individual stems apart as carefully as you can. Yes, the roots are going to be tangled. Yes, you might lose one or two in the process, but don't panic. You're not going to get a perfectly clean separation every time, and that's completely fine. What you're aiming for is the bigger, healthier-looking stems. A stem with a decent clump of roots still attached is going to grow on brilliantly. A tiny little seedling with barely anything hanging off the end of it, you can leave that one. Focus your energy on the ones that look like they've got something to work with. From a single supermarket pot, you should be able to rescue somewhere between 6 and 8 usable plants, each one now with its own dedicated space, its own soil, its own access to everything it needs to actually thrive. Pop each one into its own individual pot with some fresh compost. Nothing fancy required here. Any decent all-purpose potting mix will do the job. Give each plant a good drink once it's settled in, let the water soak through properly, top up the soil if it drops a bit, and then find them a bright, warm spot. A sunny windowsill is perfect. And then just watch what happens over the next week or so. New growth, strong growth. The same plant that would have been in the bin is now pushing out fresh leaves like it's making up for lost time, because it finally has what it needed all along, room to breathe. But here's the thing, repotting is only half the story, and if you stop there, you're still leaving most of that plant's potential on the table. Once your separated plants have settled in and you're seeing new growth come through, grab a clean pair of scissors or pruners. Find the central stem of each plant. Look for the point just above a healthy set of leaves. You'll usually see a couple of little baby shoots sitting right there at that junction, already waiting. Now cut the central stem just above them, not all the way down to the soil, just that section at the top, right above those leaves. And I know, this feels completely wrong the first time you do it. You're cutting off perfectly good, healthy growth. It goes against every instinct. But this single cut is honestly the most important thing you can do for a basil plant because of what happens next. That central stem is where the plant has been directing all of its energy, pushing everything upwards into one single shoot. When you remove it, the plant doesn't panic. It redirects. Those little side shoots that were quietly waiting just below the cut, they suddenly become the priority. They get all the energy that was going into that one central stem, and one stem becomes two. If you do this regularly, let the new stems grow a couple of sets of leaves, then cut those two. 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8. Instead of one tall, lanky plant desperately reaching toward the light before going to seed, you end up with something wide, bushy, and ridiculously productive, the kind of basil plant that takes over the windowsill, the kind people actually comment on. And speaking of going to seed, there's one last thing worth knowing, because it catches a lot of people out. If your basil starts pushing up tall, thin stems with little clusters of tiny white flower buds at the top, that's the plant switching into a completely different mode. It's decided it's done growing and it's time to make seeds. Once that switch happens, the leaves start to taste bitter. The plant stops putting its energy into the parts you want, and the whole thing goes downhill pretty quickly. If you catch those flower spikes early and pinch them off before they open, you can usually pull the plant back. But if it gets ahead of you, it's very hard to reverse. So pay attention. If the plant is suddenly stretching upward rather than spreading outward, if the leaves seem smaller, if you can see those little buds forming at the very top, act on it. Pinch them off. Your plant is not being difficult. It's just telling you something has shifted. And behavior is the only language it has. So, next time you're standing in that supermarket aisle looking at that pot of basil, full and green and smelling like everything you want summer to be, go ahead and grab it. Just don't put it straight on the windowsill and hope for the best. Take it home, pull it apart, give each plant its own space in its own pot, and then make that one cut on the central stem. The whole thing takes about 20 minutes. What you get back is months of fresh basil, more than you can realistically use from the same plant you've thrown in the bin half a dozen times before. If this changed the way you think about that little supermarket pot, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. Have you ever tried separating a supermarket basil? Did it survive? I genuinely want to know. In the next video, there's one more trick you can do to your basil that most people have never come across. Do it once and you'll never go back.